And you've been asked the question.
Yeah. It's a conversation.
Good. Good.
And I would like to refer back to what we've discussed basically in Paris. This why is that such a big problem?
That's perfect.
Very professional.
And another wow. How enticing, elusive, and maybe fragile. Nature has been a topic here at Davos and in rooms like this and in a huge part of this group for years. Years and years we've talked about how important nature is for our prosperity, for us as humans and for our future. How come that we talking, discussing, developing solutions and ideas have not come really far yet? When we look into the pledges for nature, they are not meeting the required 900 trillion by a magnitude. And even worse, they have not been filled with money. There's a big rollback. So the question is, with all the beauty that we saw, with all the interdependence that we noticed, we as humanity, we with our businesses, we with our lives are depending on the health of the system. Why are we having such difficulties to allocate the time, attention, and resources that we need to keep this green infrastructure, this natural capital, this wealth of ours alive and regenerated? That's a discussion, or that's a question I want to discuss now with Debora Spar and Jörg Eigendorf. Would you join me on stage? Maybe I just have it. Let me start with you, Debora. Debora, I met a while ago when she was again in Europe. She's from the Harvard Business School and they're teaching business administration with a focus on business and global society. And let me come back to that question. Why are we having such a difficulty to really embrace the huge risks, thinking about LA, thinking about Valencia in Europe, and the huge opportunities in nature and natural capital as one part of our economic equation?
So is this on?
Yeah.
Okay, great. First of all, thank you for inviting me here. It's a great pleasure. And I wish I had a quick answer to your question, and I wish I had an easy solution, neither of which I do, however. And I think the problem of climate, you've heard me describe it this way before, is a truly wicked problem. And wicked, not just in the sense that it's, evil and disastrous, but wicked in the sense that it really defies easy solutions. There is no one sector that can fix it. There is no one government that can fix it. There's no one heroic actor who can fix it. It involves fundamental changes in our way of life over a time period and in places where all the incentives are against it. So just to give a super fast, summary, what would have to happen to make any serious progress here? Well, companies that have spent hundreds of years doing one thing and making lots of money doing that one thing would have to stop doing it. Billions of people who live their lives in certain ways doing certain things would have to stop doing those things. Countries that have not yet developed would have to give up the plans for development that they have harbored and treasured for so long. And there's no incentive to do that, no financial incentive in the financial world we live in. And the rewards for doing it would go to different sectors and different people. So the sort of easiest way, I think, to wrap one's arms around this, although it's a bit flippant, so I apologize in advance, the people who benefit the most from our fixing climate change have not yet been born. And so it's really, really hard for people who are alive today to do something which will benefit people who haven't been born yet. And of course, the people who haven't been born yet have no say in the equation. And so all of the incentives are in the wrong place. And so any one sort of positive step is particularly heroic because the person or the organization that makes that step won't benefit from it. So we need to flip the problem completely on its head and come up with the kinds of solutions that, quite frankly, don't exist in the current economic and political climate we live in.
Thank you. So just to try, I just tried to summarize a bit for my understanding. It's a long-term problem. So we live in the short-term gratification system. We need a short-term benefit for changing our way of doing business. And it's something that is explicitly involving so many sectors, people, that we need to collaborate in a way we have not done before. Maybe
just to pause on that for 1 second. Yeah. Collaboration here is so critical and so hard to get because of what climate is. There's no way to draw boundaries there. So even if Switzerland were to do everything right, it wouldn't make a difference for the globe, and it wouldn't make a difference for Switzerland.
So maybe I take a turn off for the discussion here to make it at least a bit easier to have. Let's take nature. Nature is the big sink for carbon. So let's focus on nature. It's more local, it's more tangible. Everybody understands the nature where we live. You can see it, you can feel it, you can smell it. And it's more attributable to certain actors. So Switzerland can do something against landslides, against floods. So there is an more immediate return. Let's focus on that for now. Jörg, you are the Chief Sustainability Officer at Deutsche Bank, and you have been there for a while, being responsible for the understanding of the impacts and dependencies of Deutsche Bank, and also your customers, I assume. Is there an increasing understanding that there is a tangible risk and also a huge opportunity in focusing, let's take it for the shorter term, in nature?
Yes, there is, and I just want to pick up what Debora just said. I would assume in today's world, even those who are not born would act the same as human beings act now, because the incentive system is just wrong. And let's face it, it's not about, we don't talk anymore about 10-year risk, 20-year risk. We talk about 2-year, 3-year, 5-year risk. My daughter lived in LA for 12 years, came back last year. She has still a house there, very near to the fires. One of her answers was, when that all started, that's close to not Pasadena. I'm just looking for it. It's close to the Palisades and so on. That won't burn down. The Kardashians lives there. Wow. So that is our understanding. This is how the way human beings look at that. What is not imaginable. What happened now in Los Angeles was unimaginable. But we all knew this is a tangible risk. And why haven't we acted this way? And why don't we act? Because we have a typical free rider problem. Anything you see right now, and Debora is professor at the Harvard Business School, you can go 70 years, 100 years back. We knew it in economic theory. Internalizing externalities, external cost of doing business. The price system is completely wrong. I mean, we had an interesting discussion yesterday about Brazil, and one of the Brazilian representatives said, look, we are not the problem. The world is buying our meat. The world is not willing to pay for meat which is going without deforestation. And when I look even in sustainability events, you suddenly see that T-bone steaks are served. You just say, guys, what are you eating here? You should pay $200, $500, $1,000 for this, because then you pay the price and we can internalize the externalities. And now you come back to your question. Is this changing? Yes, it is. Does our CEO understand these risks? Yes. Is he completely aware? Yes, he is, because otherwise I wouldn't be in my job anymore. I've been reporting to him for the last more than 6 years. The thing is, but if we, for example, invite an investor to our senior management briefing, we have a global leadership offsite once a year, and you invite one of our top investors into the room. They tell you for 30 minutes what you have to do. They don't mention sustainability a single time. And then always the same thing happens. I don't even have to get up. Somebody else gets up and said, you haven't talked about sustainability. Isn't that on your agenda? Oh, yes, it is. But first get your capital right, your capital allocation, all the controversy you get out of the room. Your cost management has to be good and your revenue side as well. And then we talk about sustainability. This is fundamentally, if you look to Johan Rockström talking yesterday, what risks we are having here. If the amok, the jet stream starts to stop, this is going to be a catastrophic event. And our risk management right now with what's happening is clearly saying, so far we talked about transformation. I now say, let's make as much transformation out of a disruption. We now talk about collaboration. At the same time, we see the Net Zero Banking Alliance falling apart. Canada's just stepped out of it too, left it with the Europeans and the Asians. And I can tell you, I've been responsible for our net zero management in our Deutsche Bank for the last couple of years. It has been a tremendous effort. And here comes what makes change. If you tell business people you all have to go up the mountains, they will try to be up the mountain as fast as possible, on the best way as possible, the safest way possible. If suddenly you tell them, and I get this question every day, what are the others doing? Do they also have to go up the mountains? Yes, they have to. And suddenly you have to say, they tell you, down there, and they're still having a party? Are you sure we have to go up the mountain? And that changes the whole game. Then you suddenly don't think, they ask you, what is so nice up there on the mountain? The view, it's cold up there, and it's hard to get up there. And they're having a party down there. You really want us to go up the mountain? Only that question is already a detrimental question in our environment right now. And this is exactly picking up what Debora said. We need it needs governments, and it starts with the governments. They need to set the frame to internalize the externalities. And we as banks globally, it's a huge achievement, said we are willing to climb up that mountain. And if that stops, then we're going to lose time. We're going to lose a lot of time we don't have. And that means out of a transition, we planned for a transition, becomes a disruption. And to be honest, if you ask me, do people understand it? Yes, one of my biggest challenges is to permanently educate the management board. When I saw Johan yesterday, Johan Rockström from the Potsdam Institute for Climate Impact Research, but everybody of you must know him. Yes, this is again intelligence I have to bring back to the management board and to our senior people. But they're smart enough. I don't know a CEO who is not talking about it, just posted it on LinkedIn. Why aren't they talking about it? Because they don't get benefit for it. And the thing is, if you don't get benefit for it, they are aware of these risks. I talked to, and then I stopped, to one of the leading CEOs in Germany from the industrial sector and said, what's your biggest risk? He says, a non-linear development of climate change and the consequences. That is my biggest disruptive risk. And to be honest, right now, we have to prepare for disruption. And we see what disruption means. Los Angeles, that was disruption. And we will see further events that will happen, and they will increase. And even if we stop tomorrow and be an A-class student in carbon avoidance, we haven't solved the nature issue, because maybe then we have planted solar farms all over the place and we have no biodiversity anymore. The absorption capacity of the world will go down. Even if we did everything right from tomorrow on, we will have, for a time being, we will cross the 1.5 degrees. We've crossed it already. We probably cross the 2 degrees. And then with good management, we can get it back, and it will take decades, and it will cost a lot of people's life.
And it's long-term, it's exponential, so we have difficulties to catching it back. I'm with you.
Disruptive risks are super difficult to model.
When we talk about those disruptive changes, the fires of LA and the risk that's in your balance sheet, any balance sheet of any company, any bank, any insurance in this world. Last Thursday, there was an article in the Financial Times where the Financial Stability Board warned of a broader panic in the financial market due to those upcoming disruptions. You say we need governments. I'm not so confident right now that there will be a lot of governmental support on this in the coming years. But there are a couple of rules that board members surely are aware of. That's the director's obligation to paint a true and fair picture of the state of the company. How are those risks that they are very aware of being accounted for? Do they feel this is something that actually concerns my very personal individual liability?
As soon as you get it into the reporting, you are in the personal liability. Very simple, and CSRD helps. You may say, no, wow, a banker says CSRD helps. Yes, it helps. Is the CSRD done the right way? No. I've been in Brussels a lot, and they understood that this has been, they put first-class students in the 5th grade and told them to prepare for the SAT. That doesn't work. You need to really, I think the Asian, Singapore is doing it smarter, starting with on this lower level, then going to the 2nd level, then the 3rd level, then taking the 1st level away. This is a way how to do it. We are aware in CSRD with the double materiality helps, because you suddenly, I can give you a simple example. I'm responsible for the strategy chapter in our sustainability statement. So the most central chapter. And there are areas where I, as CSO, I have no responsibility really for. Am I responsible for data security? No. Am I responsible for certain other things? No. But the things I get suddenly back, I will say, that is not sufficient. This is not good enough. And then suddenly action happens. Because when I say this reporting is not good enough, what do you have? What does good look like? Where are we on this journey? How do we want to get there? These answers need to be, these questions need to be answered in a strategy chapter. Then you suddenly see nothing is maybe there, and then action. If you have a discipline management, and I have 15 project management people in my office who do nothing else than project management, I love that discipline, and then you really manage it through. This is what reporting does, and this is why CSRD helps. What we will see now, though, is that CSRD with this extraterritorial meaning it has, that will be very interesting to see how this is going to develop over the next couple of years, next couple of months. We all know that the EU is changing it, and I think it's the right way they do it. Maybe this is going to be a big challenge, but it's helpful because then you're on the personal liability, then you're on the management board liability, then everybody of us is liable. I have to sign off, I'm liable. So every one of us takes it differently, and it forces us into data. Data. I can't underestimate. Don't run a bank without having data. Impossible. I was a journalist for 2.5 decades. I had to learn that dearly. You need to have data. Without data, you're done in a bank. You need to have something you need to measure management against.
And we need to ensure that there's no party in the valley going on, but CSRD is there to stay.
CSRD is one of where you have to climb the mountain.
Yeah. Debora, I would like to come back to you. You had something immediately to respond to this.
It's very similar to what Jörg said from a slightly different perspective. I sit on a number of corporate boards. And, one of the things you learn as you start doing this is boards are pretty boring, right? And I think it's slightly different in Europe than the US. But basically, you have an accountability function. So you sit there as a board member, and to some extent, you do have to check your personal values. Not that you go against your personal values, but you're there to sort of make sure that the company's audited financial statements are accurate. So the single greatest way to change company behavior is to change the accounting standards. It's not glamorous. It's not fancy. It's not feel good. But companies at some level are sort of, they're just sets of standard operating procedures. One of my favorite sort of things to point to is when you sit on an audit committee and there's a line every quarter that talks about the company's goodwill. That's a made-up number, right? There is no goodwill, right? I mean, there's goodwill, but you can't count it. Companies just report what they're told to report. So I completely agree with you. Ultimately, you can't ask companies by themselves to tackle this issue because their purpose is to make money, even if they're making money in a good way. So governments have to put some standards in place to tell everyone to go up the mountain, or you need to have these sort of non-governmental or quasi-governmental entities changing the boring accounting standards, which actually change behavior. I always quote one of my brilliant colleagues at Harvard named George Serafim, who's an accountant, and he says, we made all this stuff up. We can make it up again. GDP, I will remind everybody, is a made-up construct. Gross domestic product does not exist in nature. We made it up. And so I think in some odd way, one of the possible pathways into the future is through the accountants. And I'm not an accountant.
Actually, I have 1,000 other questions for you, but this was the perfect segue to our second panel. So I will just say we have to keep that conversation going, and we need to check our rules of the game. We made them up. Do we simply need to change those rules? No?
It's more, we need to get it in the pricing system. If I buy, we know this with cigarettes. In Europe, you have these terrible pictures on it. Then if you buy the meat, which costs rainforest dearly, then you should see a terrible picture and pay. There needs to be ways to get it into the pricing system. And the question is, if we don't achieve the protecting nature, and I have these discussions now with many government officials in the global south, and it's always the same issue. They tell you, we need to monetize the protection of the rainforest. Otherwise it will be gone. Let's face it, humankind is, who of you thinks that humankind is intelligent? I think we are intelligent, but we are not sensible. We don't act sensibly. We usually tend to, we act sensibly out of our own pocket because our purse may tell us this is sensible, and we always tell each morning ourselves, if I do it, if I leave the light on, so many people leave the light on right now. What change can I achieve here? And this is a problem. We need to get it in the pricing system. I'm strongly believing that we need two things. We need innovation. Without innovation, it won't work. Especially also the Landbanking group, what you are doing. You will develop heavily because of innovation. You will drill it down to the spot on the ground and you will evaluate exactly what is happening there. So that is the one thing. For that, we need market economy, we need entrepreneurs, we need to make them work. Otherwise, free, liberal economies will thrive on that. The other thing is, and that's a prerequisite, we need to get it into the pricing system, because if people don't pay for it, unfortunately, it just won't happen. Otherwise, it's CSR and philanthropy. I love CSR and I love philanthropy. I can tell you one thing. When I built up the Chief Sustainability Office, I left behind CSR because I really wanted to focus on the boring stuff, as Debora said. Most people think it's a super exciting job. 80% of what I'm doing is pretty boring sometimes, because it's number crunching. It's really try to get to carbon budgets on a divisional level. Have fun and discuss it with the people. But once you have done it, you can be proud, and then it gets really exciting.
I want to just throw out a crazy idea. This is something I'm really turning over in my own mind, because I think I agree with you that the only way to sort of get traction is to take the beautiful nature we saw up here and find some way to monetize it, to put it into the pricing system.
The protection.
Yeah, but part of me says it's not going to work. And part of me says we need perhaps a completely different system of value. How do we recreate a system of value that's not... I don't know how to do this.
I agree with you, but we need to focus. I mean, the thing is, for your value system, that starts with kids. We need to raise them. We need to bring them up differently. We need to change the mindset of a whole humankind.
We need to change how we teach those decision makers what actually the core of business
and
is.
To rewire brains takes years. We don't have the time. We need to think on where are the focus points, where we can create. And by the way, then I stop. Germany can't make a big difference at all, and Switzerland can't either with their 2% of global emissions and with their 0.x% of global emissions. We can only do one thing. We can be a showcase for the world that this transition works without killing the economy. If we achieve that, we have done our job. And that is the fastest way. We don't have time anymore. It's running out. And if you look at the recent data, we are close to tipping points, which don't happen suddenly. They will evolve slowly, and they will creep in the system. We can't turn them around anymore. So I love your idea. I'm happy to be part of it. I'm happy to educate for the rest of my life little children, and getting neuroscience on board. But we need to change things now within the system in order to solve. We need to do both.
We agree we need to do both. But now I have to add something as somebody who doesn't believe in only the power of the consumer. When we talk about the price system, we need to talk about the accounting system. We need to talk about pricing, exactly, going not only government, also within the company. So you talked about the incentive systems, and maybe this is where we just stop right now for the moment being. We need to work with the existing system. We need to work on the existing playbook, the game, rules of the game. And we need to put a value on nature. If we don't put a value on nature and improvements, protection is always, tends to sound CSR to me, but it's actually not something we protect for others, but for our prosperity going forward. It's actually an investment into future performance. If we put a price on this, we start to value it, because currently we value it with basically zero.
Or much too low. I mean, this is exactly the point. We need to get to the point, and it's not like, oh, we just turn it around. It's slowly creating examples for that. And I don't believe only in the consumer. The voluntary stuff is very limited. People are not willing to pay higher prices if they are not a mechanism to get them pay these prices. And by the way, there are examples a lot. And I want to start with one very positive example. That's ozone. We stopped the deterioration. We have an example where it worked. So let's learn from that experience and what we did there. Nobody would buy a refrigerator anymore that will destroy our ozone, because it's impossible. And there are different things we've done, and we need to work in this direction. And as you said at the beginning, it's so super collaborative, and we all need to sit on the table, and the smartest people need, not only the smartest people, we need to change the narrative. We need to show the world that this is good and that we benefit all from it, and we make the benefit better in order to say people permanently, to tell them, you don't have to do this, you don't have to do this, don't have to do this won't work. I mean, we've tried it now for 30 years, and scientists are worn out by telling us what is going to happen, and the rest of the world is saying, we don't look up.
Add the carrot to the stick. Thank you.
Thank you.
So I guess we're not marching in the future. We have to dance ourselves into the future. That's why I like this a lot. Now, I'm really excited now to present to you a very, very boring panel. It's about accounting. In a reversal of our normal roles, now Sonja has opened the box and I have to close it. Those who know us well, that's the other way around from how we typically do it, because you put quite a hard challenge in front of us. In a way, we have to rebuild our economic wealth-generating engine on a ridge, where on the one side we have all the nature risks and all the climate risks that are very soon existence threatening. And we heard Johan talk about that very articulate during this week. Well, on the other hand, we have the fear of loss of our prosperity. And we've seen on Monday in Washington what that fear can eventually lead us to. And in the middle of that, we have to rebuild our wealth-generating engine. The good thing is we have done that before. 1494, Luca Pacioli, he did double accounting system. That was our response to the beginning of mercantilism. Then in the 30s, we did the U.S. Securities Act, which was our response to the Great Depression. Then in the 1990s, we did IFRS and we did International Accounting Standards. That was the response to the Asian tigers joining the global economy and enlightening this entire firework of globalization. And then we had Sarbanes-Oxley, which was the response for the Enrons and the WorldComs trying to trick us. So, and every single time we found for ourselves a new language of how to transact, of how to invest, and how to share our prosperity. So we've done it before. And now we have to do it again for what I call the post-Solo world. Solo, some of you are economists and you know that. He still holds the claim for explaining how a wealth-generating engine works, how we create growth. And essentially it says we need two ingredients to fuel that engine. One is capital and one is labor. We need a bit of stardust, and that is technology. Empirically, that explains 25% of growth. 25%, and we still teach it in every university, in every economics faculty on the planet. Even I am forced to teach it to my students. Thesis that is 75% wrong. Interesting. We do know that the other 75% have a completely different origin, and that's the topic of today. It's nature. We have been depleting nature for the last 200 years. We didn't price it. That's why you don't see it in our accounts. And we have to stop that now. We have to reinvent the way we run our economies in a way that we can invest into nature. And that we have started to understand how to bring emissions down. We have not invented an economic model that allows us to reinvest into nature as our critical infrastructure in the way we are investing into every other infrastructure category. That's a tough one. And because it's a tough one, I need two people to help me out. We have an exquisite panel today, and I ask Peter Bakker and Kai Andrzejewski to join me on stage. Now, Peter Bakker, he is he's a business leader, and now he is a business leader of business leaders. As a business leader, you were leading TNT. Back then, we didn't know each other yet. I was a McKinsey partner, and I was serving Deutsche Post, and I had an electronic bracelet at my ankle, which forbid me sort of even to get close to you. But then there was in 2012, we had a party near Munich, which at least sort of was good enough to ruin our McKinsey careers, because afterwards we couldn't stop doing what we're doing now. And you are little bit to blame for that. TNT, and then now you are the CEO. You have been for how many? 14 years of WBCSD, which is that superpower that brings all the CEOs together. And you are the source of constructive unrest and the monkey on their back. You've been driving their agenda. And then there's Kai Andrzejewski. You've been managing partner at KPMG. You are a true accountant, and you have to save the world, whilst Peter and I will be leaning back in this conversation now, because it's accountants who have to save the world. But then you were the CFO of Sixt, which is a large leasing and car rental company in Germany. Many of you know that. And now you are a geopolitical strategist for Agora, and you are a professor for business and accounting. Now, Peter, let me start with you. Last weekend, we could read all kinds of things in the newspaper relevant to this topic. We could read that Sonja said it, the Financial Stability Board really warns of panic reactions in the capital markets. Then we heard that Los Angeles might not be a 30 billion, it might be 150, it might be a 250 billion event. Then we heard that Trump might tank Basel. To those of you who are not in regulation, that's very much the rules for banks to show that these risks, or what risks they are really running. Well, and then of course on our bedside table we read Accountants Will Save the World from 2013, your interview back then, which of course is all our bedside reading. Now, help us to understand what to make out of all of this. Is this now the moment when people finally recognize this thing is real, and we start pricing these risks into the way we price capital. And so we start buying the good stuff, the green stuff, and we drop the brown stuff? Or is this the moment where fear is getting so big that everyone has an incentive to kick the can further down the road? You're observing this. Where are we?
Well, we're still suffocating in the diesel smells when we walk the streets of Davos. Sustainability is moving to the side shows, dark rooms like this and the SDG tent up on the hill. I mean, there's always a simple question. It's a bit annoying to do it, but how many white badges are in this room? I see one. Tells it all. There's not a white badge in the SDG tent to be found, nor here. The leaders are just talking AI and geopolitics and other things. So we're not particularly winning the battle. What happened on Monday will not make it any easier. And we need to begin to use what is happening now so visibly in LA, in Valencia, in Dubai, and wherever you look, southern Germany with the floods. It's everywhere. And these, as you so rightly pointed out in the previous panel, this will only get worse. Even if we stop all the emissions tomorrow, natural disasters will continue to increase for the foreseeable future. So my plan of attack is super simple. We need to stop talking about net zero by 2050 or nature positive by 2050. We need to start focusing on what are we going to do in the next 5 years. And there's two things we need to do. One is we need to really say what are the solutions that are available. And there's 5 solutions whose business cases exist. Renewable energy, energy efficiency, halting deforestation, methane reductions, and one more, which I always forget. I'll get back to that. The second thing we need to do is we need to hold people accountable for the progress they're making in implementing those solutions. And that's where the accounting will save the world statement once came from, where we also need to recognize that massive progress has been made. Now, even 5 years ago, I was hammering people's heads, please consolidate the accounting framework for non-financials. Seemed impossible 5 years ago. Now we have the ISSB, now we have the CSRD. Make this as soon as possible mandatory everywhere, and then, in your phrase, everybody will climb the mountain. And everybody will be able to compare whether I'm climbing the mountain in a better way than my peer. But that's only one part. The mistake we occasionally make is we're too focused on reporting, on disclosure. But what it's really about is better decision-making, and that's better behavior change. And that's not just the accounting rule. That is, does the capital market put a different valuation if I do better? Do my consumers buy my products if I do better? So we need transparency across the board because that will drive the behavior change. The thing we need in the middle between the solutions and the accountability is transition plans. And that's going to be, in my mind, 12 months from now, probably not in this town because this town is not taking this serious, but in other meetings, we will have a standard, comparable transition plan for every business that will clearly lay out which of the solutions for climate or for nature are you planning to implement, what amount of CapEx are you willing to invest there, and then your disclosures, whether it's CSRD or ISSB, will show are you actually making progress in the emission reductions. So we, the Sustainability, and I assume many of you are in the room here, we should stop beating up CEOs saying, you are backtracking on your commitments. He's a friend of mine, I really don't care anymore what Paul Polman promised 3 years ago, or any other leader who then had courage. We need to hold people accountable for the transition plan and the progress they're making against it. Hard-nosed, action-focused, what are the steps? The second thing, and that's the other part of the accounting rule, it actually falls apart in two. There's a beverage company, which I can't name because I've helped them, $12 billion of revenue. They make alcoholic beverages. You can say all kinds of things on alcoholic beverages, but that's their business. $1.5 billion EBITDA profit for the non-financials in the room. They have mapped on every location in the world where they grow their wheat, their grapes, their whatever they need to make these drinks, commodities. For each location, they have weather models, climate models that will give them scenarios on what will happen to rainfall, to temperatures, to whatever can impact the yield of their crops. In almost all locations, yields are coming down. Too much water, too little water, too high temperatures, whatever it may be. Yield coming down means commodity prices go up. Commodity prices going up means profit comes down. So this enlightened CEO was a non-listed company, so he didn't have all the disclosure obligations that listed boards have. 5 years from now, base case scenario, $1.5 billion profit becomes zero. That's how close these risks are. And there is not a standardized, mandatory risk assessment tool for all businesses in the world to make this assessment. And I admit 100% in 5 years shows high sensitivity and probably location-based. The estimate is for most businesses it will be between 25 and 50% in 5 to 10 years from now. No board understands this. Once boards understand it, and we find a way to disclose that to our markets collectively, not individually company, because they will be punished, then capital markets will say, shit, we need to reprice, revalue, and then we get an incentive to say, what are you doing to offset these risks and to mitigate the sources of them? That's where accountants will come to.
Very quickly, can I come to you in a second? But knowing what your climate risks are and knowing how sensitive your profits are to that is one thing. Why aren't we investing? I mean, why wouldn't they now do what you can do with nature? You can rebuild the soils, you can rebuild the shadow trees, you can bring the pollinator insects back, you can measure the water holding capacity. Look, clearly something that also we as a Landbanking group are quite interested in, because our thesis is that in the end we will have to move from observing, complaining and feeling scared into reinvesting like into any other infrastructure. What's holding them back right now, your beverage friends? Yeah, still to you.
I think it's the fact that I think nature isn't valued. So if you have to start investing in new ways in nature, that means extra capital layout. This particular company is now beginning to do it as a result. I mean, you actually educated me a few months ago, which is a story I'm telling everywhere around the world. So I'll tell it, and then you can tell me I memorized it wrong.
Circular economy.
There's a regenerative farm in southern Germany. Southern Germany had massive floods. One plot of land was traditional agriculture. One was 1 year, 3 years, 5 year. Floods flow over the land. The agriculture, the traditional agriculture, soil completely eroded, washed away. As the regenerative practices was longer on the field, there was no harm to the land. People don't know this. So first we need to make them aware of the risk. You live in a floodplain, your land might wash away. And this solution is not just for biodiversity or for better yield, it's also for more resilience. That's an education that not too many have gotten.
Kai, isn't it a bit schizophrenic, really? On the one hand, we are all pro-marketeers, yeah? So we need to solve problems with markets. We particularly believe in capital markets. We see these risks coming, and we also believe that investor protection and financial stability are high values, and we are very happy to argue in favor of that. But then when it comes to something like CSRD, which sheds light on what you really do, we all of a sudden start pushing back. So why is that? And I'm asking this question because this very question, the one thing that we are all holding on to, the double materiality disclosure of CSRD, is the only thing we can currently see worldwide, which is tackling this problem. And within the next 4 weeks, we in Europe will decide whether we are tanking the whole thing or not. So why is it so hard for business to see this as the new railways on which we are running our business trains in the future?
First of all, just a quick remark to the last panel. I was really thrilled to see that accounting is really sexy and has a position. In the end, they tainted a little bit the story that we are still boring, but I would try to prove the different.
You have the chance now to turn that around.
I think what is going wrong is that accountants are not doing their job. They're not saving the world. because we do not, and I would object a little bit to the conclusion which we had in the last panel, we do not need a different way of thinking within accounting because we're just applying what we have in the wrong way. Let me give you an example. Once a year there's a depiction in a favorite German financial newspaper where they say how many goodwill is on the balance sheet. We see that's just a construct. A goodwill is on the balance sheet in comparison to how many equity does the companies have. And when you take the DAX together, it's about the same number, 400 billion on the one side and 400 billion on the other side, excluding banks and insurance companies. And if you do the valuation of the company, you usually do it by the normal economic models you have, and you anticipate a growth rate. And this growth rate, given the actual scenarios which we are having, is actually not positive, it must be negative. And if you have a negative growth rate, the existing business model is actually worthless. So nowadays, you had to impair your complete goodwill that would erase the complete equity of the companies right now, just applying the rules. And I think this is the current really mismatch where companies, and I'm coming back to your question in a second, are not anticipating this one. And I really look at the audit profession I was in for a long time. They're not getting it that the assets are worthless. And I like this comparison between transition and disruption because right now we are just linearizing the past and not anticipating the change. And the CSRD, which is from the concept one thing which could save the world, but as it is done just hindering the process, it has to be simplified, because what the CSRD is calling for, that right now you really have to be specific about the financial impact of what is happening to your company, what you just were describing. And I think here it comes into play that from the accounting side, you have to come to an honest and real accounting. And we have a unique opportunity with the closing which comes out this year to challenge companies and to challenge the C-level, to challenge the auditors, the supervisory boards, and also the investors, because when you take a specific look, and that's what I'm really keen to do, take a specific look at the financial drivers of your KPIs, your EBITDA, and then you have a look at what your non-financial drivers are. And for the time being, I'm seeing 20% of companies who have understood that the asset that's which they're having is just not existing. So here the pressure has to come, in my eyes, to make clear that you have to change your business model, otherwise you are dead already. And you can bring the state into play. Just for example, when you have this very profitable 10% bottom line profitability company, which in the rationale I just described would be worthless, what would be the consequence? You have to depreciate your complete asset base. And by the way, what consequence would that have for the state? There's a profitable company with a very positive cash flow, which is actually worthless and is making losses. So no taxation. And if you push it to the next level, you look at the mismatch between the European Union and the US. You say, okay, you can the owner of that company could take his assets, move them out of the company. It's a little bit simplified. Reinvest them in the US as Basel III and all the risk issues are gone, and start a business with a bankable asset base, and you lost the asset base and you lost your taxation. And I'm pretty sure at that time the Minister of Finance starts, we have to do something. But here, accountants can save the world if they challenge the people who set up the accounts, especially the auditors. And that's a big failure of the audit profession I see right now, that they're implementing CSRD like hell, but nobody's really challenging the valuation.
A couple of things. I mean, I think CSRD is a case of we want people to run before they can walk. I mean, I think that's what you said was the Singapore implementation. I was in a meeting with 40 CEOs yesterday. I don't think they were aware who I was, but there was a conversation. Shall we just all agree not to fill the forms? Because they all thought it was nonsense, useless, and then see what the EU will do. Well, I mean, at the end of the meeting, we were able to convince them that that might be tricky, but it's the mindset. And what CSRD has done, it has driven enormous compliance instead of innovation focus. So from that point of view, ISSB has some examples, because that A focuses first on climate and then later on other things. But still, you need to be a bit careful. I think the one other thing, and I agree the audit and accountants have a big role to play, but There is one thing that I want to leave in this room. For those of you who understand a bit of finance, valuations in the world are made on discounted cash flow basis. And the discount is the amount of risk that you assume in the future cash flow of a company or an asset. By saying these words, discounted cash flow, we eliminate nature, because Mother Nature does not send bills. Well, she does if you put LA on fire, but in the regular course of business, it doesn't. So there is no IRR, no financial return on saving the world. There's lots of low-hanging fruit, energy efficiency, other things that will have a business case today, but we need to fundamentally rethink the economic model, the incentives it gives. And we need to put nature on the balance sheet, as you can better explain this room than I can, but we need to find ways to change valuation models.
How should that work? And we will get there in a second, because there are two conversations. The first one is around dependencies, where today's business model is already at risk. And even that we don't get managed. And then we have this other thing where we have impacts, which then in the long run, of course, will also turn into dependencies. That's a consequence that few people get, because in the end, we'll all be hit by that bus. But let's quickly round up the conversation on dependencies. So be the professor for a moment and explain to us, how would a balance sheet really look like if you really take all these risks now into liabilities, and if you really take the assets or the actions that you are taking to mitigate and to bring these risks down as an asset onto your balance sheet. And what must happen that we finally wake up in a world where capital pricing is done accordingly?
I think if I try to find a practical answer, when you look at the balance sheet on the one hand, and you look at the future, the discounted cash flow on the other hand, which is of course to a certain extent reflected in the balance sheet. If we would have a conceptual, precise valuation of the balance sheet on the asset side and on the liability side, and taking, I like that thought regarding transformation and disruption, really into account, you would end up with a heavy depreciation of your assets and a heavy buildup of provisions. So you would actually erase your equity base. Most business models which you are driving today would be bust. I think that's part number one. And when you then get into the strategy of the company, and when you try to value the future with it and the cash flow of the future, the change in the model should be as simple as possible, because it takes that thought from the last panel. We do not have the time to develop a standard for 2 decades, and having a simplifying valuation of the risks which come to the company and put them as a deduction of the cash flows, that would also significantly reduce the future linearization of the existing model. And you would see that the company who has an idea to do something different with less resources would be much more profitable in the future. And what really frustrated me being an executive of a company were 2 things. First of all, what you just said regarding the CSRD was a very similar discussion in the circles of CFOs I was participating. It was a complete compliance approach and not talking about the substance of it. And I think here you have to understand, if you are really a good entrepreneur, a good C-level, if you develop a positive generating cash flow model in the future, taking this disruptions into the model, that would be the good thing. And I would look for a model which is not changing the given accounting rules, because it took 10 years after financial crisis to get a concept regarding special purpose entities to get them on the balance sheet. So it would take years, and I know how slow this process is. When you look at valuation, be much more disruptive driven. I like that thought, and use the existing system and make clear that assets are worthless. And then you have to push people. That's the only thing, because the acting people will not change behavior when they are not feeling a consequence regarding personal liability.
Moving on now to impacts and taking on the exam question that you articulated, Peter. what must happen for us to invest into nature? And it's not only the one that ensures that we still have a business when the cocoa prices quintuple, as they have done, or coffee Arabica yields are coming down by 50%, as they will do, or if you can't buy an insurance or sell an insurance California anymore, as you can't, or if you can't build a house in southern France as you can't. That nature, that thriving ecosystem out there, that is the source of all the future productivity and benefits and prosperity that we will have. Debora sort of helped us to sort of the big answer to that, of course. Why don't we just broaden our conception of wealth? So and take nature capital into it. 75% of people have nature as a screensaver. Isn't that interesting? So our intuitive sense of wealth is already very well aligned with that. Our economic sense of wealth isn't. So, however, once we've said that, then sort of the very next second we find out that is so far away from how we currently act, and then we are back to identifying what are the ways in which valuation of nature, monetization of nature, whatever, appreciation of nature is creeping in. And then we feel a bit helpless, because then we have a stagnating carbon market, which has its own baggage. Then we have biodiversity credits, which is a wonderful topic, apart from the fact that this market doesn't exist. Then we have a couple of local compliance market biodiv net gain. We have the op-debt for nature swap, but none of that adds up to the investment requirement that attractive asset called nature actually has. So what's your thesis? How will a valorization of nature step by step creep into the system?
Let me try to continue a little bit the thought of staying in the given system. And for the time being, I see a certain kind of focus on the asset side. That might be a very technical answer, but we're looking for things to capitalize, which is giving an opportunity to sell a good equity story in the future. You see what's your asset base of the future. But if we provide on the liability side of the balance sheet for the disruption risk, you would see how transparent the given business model, not only driven by the business factor, but also by other factors. Who you just named California. The interesting thing is it's not what you see right here. The next step is, if you want to build a new house in California, it's not insurable anymore. So if it is not insurable anymore, it will be difficult for a lot of people to get a mortgage. So you erase a couple of markets in a ripple effect. And these ripple effects are numerous. And these ripple effects should be part also of the right side of the balance sheet, of the liability side. And I think we have to shift a little bit the focus. Step number one, stay in the given system as much as possible, and don't forget the liability side.
So we need to, the investing into nature as an asset is the yin to the yang, which is showing the liabilities that you're really facing in a world where even a Kardashian house is not safe anymore. So starting on the liability side, Peter, what's your thesis? How will that start? How will we get to reason in the way we see the value that nature provides?
Yeah, I'm sympathetic to the view that we shouldn't move too far from the system that we have if we want momentum. So park that for a moment. But we have to have fundamental conversations about the deep system as well. Because with just the short-term issues, we're not going to fix it. And so 10 years ago, I was invited to Jeju Island IUCN Congress. I think I was the first private sector representative to be allowed on the plenary stage. So I was a bit nervous. I walk up, and I'm a shy person. So I walk up to the microphone. I said, hello, I am a capitalist. Which, if there would have been rotten tomatoes in the room, I would not have been here. I would have drowned. Anyway, I said, the problem with capitalism is that we have turned it into financial capitalism. We forget natural and social and a few other capitals. And so that's starting point number one. We must understand that there is financial capital, natural capital, and let's leave the other to the side. And natural capital at the moment is not on the balance sheet. If I buy a machine for $1 million, I put $1 million as an asset on my balance sheet. If I have whatever amount of hectares of land, maybe if I have to buy it, but if I have it, it's not on the balance sheet. It doesn't get depreciated, nothing. So how do we get that into the existing system, or how do we change the system to get it in? I think TNFD, the Task Force for Nature-Related Financial Disclosures, is step one. Again, we need to learn to walk before we run. So there is now a framework standardized on how should a business think about dependencies and impacts, risks and opportunities. That is something that we need to make mandatory for as many companies as possible, as soon as possible. Then the next step is ISSB is now studying what would that mean in terms of what a company needs to disclose on its nature or biodiversity, dependencies, impacts, risks and opportunities. And then we have the metrics, the language, but also the hopefully behavioral decision-making change that companies can then begin to apply. And then the next step is, how are we going to put that on a balance sheet? So there's never a quick answer, and in the accounting world, even less so, because of all the due process that is required, by the way, because we can't rush into it either. But we need to learn to walk.
If a Swiss food company identifies that they might not have an equity story anymore in a world where their analysts and investors read every morning in the newspaper that, for example, the cocoa price is up 5x, that we see complete supply chain breakdown, that a couple of cash crops are not available anymore, they are recognizing they have to reinvest into preventive measures in the billions to make sure that people believe them. This is a resilient, well-run, low-risk asset in which deserves to be investable. Now, and if then that company moves on and said, okay, now I'm going to invest into every plot of land, into the shadow trees, into the pollinator insects, and I'm showing that to my investors, so then clearly we have something that feels like an investment. It feels like an asset that strengthens your balance sheet, and that should give you a better conversation with your banker, with your board, with your investor, with your regulator. So, and why is it so difficult? Because in a way, it's very straightforward. We do it everywhere, every day, in the way we are maintaining and expanding our infrastructures.
I think the answer is probably the prisoner's dilemma, because the way you lay out the case is super, is what it would be logical to do. But you first need to explain the risk if you don't do it. And if you're the Swiss company that explains the risk and then says, yeah, we're working on some solutions, we're going to invest in it, your share price tanks, and every other food company in the world will laugh its head off. So we need to create a level playing field. And again, you do that through accounting standards. And we need to create risk maps. So the food company, if you're a food company invested in African cocoa, whatever, this is the type of risk profile that all companies in that business are exposed to. Then a company can say, yeah, we're equally exposed as others, but here's the things we're doing, whatever, shadow trees and other solutions. And therefore, we are in a better position. The discount for the risk should be less. Then you create in the current system an incentive to do it. But obviously the trick will be not to get carried away with incidents, LA or any other of those incidents as a reason to make a change, because the incident doesn't touch everybody. But we need to create more of a baseline to say, guys, the system is fundamentally effed. And the food system has these risks. And now the question that every food company CEO should make, what is your exposure to those risks? What is your interest or investment in the solutions? And then we can have a valuation debate.
And isn't it much simpler than it sounds? This is food now, where sort of all of a sudden it sounds very intuitive to us sort of to do that, and we wonder we are shaking our head of how we haven't done that in the past and how we still don't do it. Take the pharmaceutical industry. There was one of the interesting outcomes, out of a very few though, from the World Biodiversity Summit in Cali, was the Cali Fund, where all those companies that actually use digital sequencing information, which is using the formulas that Mother Nature provides for us, and then creates materials or pharmaceuticals to sell them, have been forced to give back to nature and reinvest into those countries that are stewarding biodiversity for us, and with a percentage point of their profits or 0.1% of their revenues. And in a way, sort of this is, and by the way, WBCSD aren't these conventions that even in the absence of UN guidance and multilateral frameworks can just be agreed upon. Mining, nature positive mining. I know that there's interest here in the audience, and just create sort of a bottom-up new convention. And then the question, Kai, to you would be, would that be something that needs to be picked up by those who are describing and auditing the liabilities if they point to those who have not done it?
Definitely, because that's the only opportunity that you really can really reassure your equity story, your innovative story, what you are doing, and also justify the diminishing profitability on the short term. So it really has to be picked up. The problem where I actually do not have a solution so far, which is very soft, which I can bring up, is the level playing field you were just mentioning, because we should be clearly aware of the fact that we are not just even having even level playing field. We are actually having counterintuitive impacts, because you're getting sued in the US if you are giving away short-term profitability to an ESG agenda, very simply speaking. And the only way you can circumvent this, one, bringing up a clear and consistent, and then you're coming back to capitalizing what you're just mentioning, a future innovative story. But right now, that is not convincing the capital markets in the US. That's
can I stay on that point? And also in your new assignment as a geopolitics advisor, what's your sense? How will this end? Are we now in that downward spiral that we can't escape? A good friend of mine, he leads a large German utility. They thought they were investing 55 billion into renewables, and now US investors are pushing them against the backdrop of the new investment regime, the new capital market over there, to put that money into share buyback. What's your view how this will evolve? Please, in a way that doesn't suck all the oxygen out of this room.
I think there is a short-term and a long-term view, and unfortunately, they're both not so bright. I think the short-term view is as the short-termism in the capital market will fuel the US market, because if you get rid of regulation, there's a windfall profit. If you get rid of Basel III and all the risk idea which is behind it, and when you look at the deregulation in all the areas, take self-driving cars. At my former company, 6, we were dealing with self-driving cars. We had functioning self-driving taxis in Munich in the city, which really is part of a shared mobility. We had to put them off the street because they were not insurable for a couple of reasons. Now you see that somebody who is making the rules, having a self-driving car, which is clearly not as sophisticated as the other one, just changes the rules and has an economic benefit. So that will be tough for us to keep up to, and that will put us under pressure regarding US investors, which you need on the one end. On the long run, when you look at the new setup in the US, and it actually starts in the first days, I sometimes feel like the sequel of House of Cards, because you have this very simple story and you have a couple of people in the system who have a quite structured idea what to do, but then you have a lot of people, and put it in polite words, with unstructured ideas what they do, and that leads into chaos, and that will lead to inefficiencies. And when you just look at things like 36 trillion debt in the US, it is functioning under the given rules-based orders so far. And if there's a certain dent to it, that can really harm the system. And then you're in a disruptive moment, and then the companies who are better prepared for this one will have a good equity story. But from both angles right now, the picture is dire.
Briefly?
No, I want to make us a little more optimistic. You know, the world is a whole...
You are an accountant and by heart.
A whole lot bigger than the USA. We're in an incredibly interesting and unfortunately turbulent time. China has got the picture right. Now, if you look at the speed of change, both ecologically but certainly climate in China, they have understood that embracing these new technologies and having the scale to really drive the solutions to unit cost that nobody else can copy creates a competitive position that will be very hard to catch up with. I was listening to von der Leyen yesterday, which she promised, the Commissioner of the EU, she promised to announce a plan on Tuesday, I think, where she said decarbonization and competitiveness is one agenda. We're in turbulent times, and everything that happens to the west of us is not going to be helpful. But it shouldn't lead to depression. The USA will fundamentally kill their competitive position in the global economy if this is what they're going to do. And if we as Europe play it smart, we might be able to catch up, but otherwise China will run away with the solution.
I clearly concur that that's what I was saying on the mid-run, because if you simplify, you have a short-term windfall profit, which we probably will see, but on the long run, that's the road to disaster.
Let me touch one last point before we have to move off this stage and ask you for some guidance for us. Amongst all these things that have to happen, where society, politics, accountants need to get to terms with each other, there is also something new needed, which is the infrastructure to manage this new problem of how economies interact with nature. And there's a whole wonderful community of nature startups, some of them sitting here in the room, which are providing this infrastructure which we need so dearly, a fast-growing, very, very exciting, very difficult space. How should we behave? How should we act if we do it with a mindset that we need to build critical infrastructure very, very fast for a very urgent problem, and not just build tech businesses, that we really consider ourselves as a community that is providing this infrastructure? How should we act and how should that new sector evolve?
Yeah, I think by learning to operate in two minds. One is the mind of the explorer, inventor, the new system that we need. But that mind should not seek gratification by applause from business leaders and policymakers on the short run, because that's not the type of weather we're in. The second mind you need to have is attach yourself to where the economy already is impacted, and that is physical risk in supply chains for business or in people's living environment when it's their houses. Those are touch points that you can immediately begin to make this case that people will say, yeah, that's actually true. But the bigger system change that we need, you must design and build and then hope that either a government, EU, China, or somebody else will say, yeah, that's actually a better way, or that elections at one point turn another way and the conversation in this street becomes a little more sensible again.
Okay.
I think take the accountant's view first. We need some rules and try to be as practical and sometimes provocative with the rules to get things done. And I think the accounting profession is a good example for this one. That is part number one. And part number two, even it might be quite holistic. We need an attitude change overall. And this is something which has to evolve. And I like that thought regarding that we have to demonstrate that what we are doing is successful in the business models which we are deriving. And if that is successful, I think that can make a difference. But rules, attitude adjustment, and innovation.
It will stay a dance. Thank you.
dancers on the stage, don't we? Yes. Would you come out? I think you have earned your applause. And Felix, the choreography, all three of you. Thank you. You don't have any idea how fast they were to pick this up. It's been a 10 days preparation. They are incredible. They are fantastic. Thank you. And now you're gone again.
Foster EIT Food, Finance Innovation Lead, and the Food Innovation Hub. I sit down to the board.